Hi, welcome to Pixels. I'm Beth Belo, and thank you so much for spending this time with me. Today, I am delighted to be talking with Angie McMonigal. Angie is a fine art and commercial architecture photographer based in Chicago, striving to bring a detailed, thoughtful perspective to her work, whether for clients or through the workshops she leads. Having grown up surrounded by nature, yet fascinated by the big city she's called home for more than 2 decades, she brings the meditative calm of her upbringing to a terrain that's always transforming. Drawing from her education in the microsciences, including molecular biology, microbiology, and virology, her focus is more frequently on bold architectural details rather than sweeping cityscapes, creating images that celebrate those unexpectedly iconic elements hiding in plain sight. She frequently works with art consultants, designers, brands, architectural firms, and private collectors, creating images that draw out the organic interplay between design, structure, environment, and society. Her publication credits are many, and they include Chicago Magazine, National Geographic, The Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and Architectural Digest. Exhibitions by galleries in Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Barcelona, and other destinations have included her work. I first became aware of Angie a few years ago. I developed an affinity for architecture photography and especially abstract architectural photography. So I attended one of Angie's Chicago workshops back in the summer of 2022. I had to sort of hesitate there for a moment because I can't believe that it's been a couple of years now. And Angie's work is really remarkable. It's very distinctive. It's very, as she says, bold. And I think you're going to find a lot of value in this conversation. In fact, I know you're going to. Even if you're a nature photographer and you haven't tried architecture photography, I think you'll find some overlap in terms of how you see the environment, how you use your imagination, what to look for to expand your creative vision. I hope you'll give this a really close listen and find some inspiration in it. And certainly if you're already doing architecture photography, you're going to walk away with some really concrete, and I suppose that's a pun intended, concrete ideas for how to continue to grow in your art form. I would love to hear from you in the comments, anything that Angie and I talk about that resonates with you or that you plan to experiment with. If you enjoy this episode, I invite you to like it and share it. And certainly if you haven't already, please do subscribe so that you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks so much, and let's get to the conversation. Hi, Angie. I am so glad to be talking with you. We met, it was the summer of 22 when I went to one of your Chicago abstract architecture workshops. And it was a memorable experience. I call it my 22 Advil weekend because there's so much walking, but so much awesome photography. And so I'm really glad to be chatting with you today.
Thanks for having me. There is a lot of walking.
There's a lot of walking.
I can't remember. Did you do the August workshop that year or May?
Oh, it was June. I'm pretty sure it was the beginning of June. June. It wasn't super hot. I remember you talking about a really hot one.
It's the only year I've done, I think, 2 workshops, or maybe it was 2021. But yeah, one of the years it was like 90 plus degrees. And I can't remember if you were on that one because that was brutal.
No.
But anyway,
I was not on the brutal one. I remember you telling us about it.
Because that was rough.
For me, it was brutal for other reasons. But totally worth it. So much. I got so much out of that workshop. And one of the things I appreciate is just having that more personal connection with you and getting to learn in a much more, not necessarily one-on-one, but in that small group, and some one-on-one. So for anybody who's watching who hasn't been on one of Angie's workshops, I highly recommend it. So I'm just putting that plug right at the top of our conversation. So I like to dive in. We're going to be doing sort of a retrospective of looking back at some of the more pivotal moments moments in your photography, but I'd like to start with where you are now. And how would you describe the artistic direction that you find yourself, or the artistic journey that you find yourself on in this moment?
That's it's always a complex, it feels like a
Mm-hmm.
lengthy answer to a question. I mean, I've been shooting for 23 years, so quite a long time. It took me about 11 years to kind of figure out what genre I wanted to focus on, which was architecture. That was maybe in 2012. So the architecture stuff started with more abstract interpretations, which is what I teach in the workshops, as you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd say in the last 3 to 4 years, I've been doing quite a bit more commercial work. So shooting for architecture firms and designers and developers and stuff like that. So a lot of my energy has been focused on that, which is very different from the more abstract way of shooting. Um, it's not it's more collaborative than the abstract artsy way of shooting, because that way is all about me. It's whatever I want to do with
Yeah.
no input from anybody else. Whereas the commercial shoots, it's definitely more collaborative, and there's shot lists involved usually, and their vision for what the space feels like. Um, it's nice when you have clients that are willing to kind of allow me to give my input in terms of what I think a shot would look like, or what shots would look best. I'd say last year was the first year that I've had firms reaching out a little bit to me for that more abstract or detailed way that I shoot, because maybe they have a project that fits well with that way that I see, like, which is just
Mm-hmm.
more intuitive for me. The commercial stuff is a little bit harder for me, or I'm just not, I haven't been doing it as long, so it doesn't come as easily. I have to work a little bit harder at it, which is not a bad thing. It's just a different way to kind of push myself photographically, creatively, and try to find ways to incorporate my style and my way of seeing into that more commercial sense. Whereas the other stuff, the more abstract and detailed stuff, comes pretty easily to me most of the time. There are occasions where I'll come across a building and I'm like, "Ooh, I don't know what to do here," and it
Yeah.
takes me a while to kind of decipher, distill what is drawing my attention to something. And sometimes it happens on maybe the second or third visit, I've noticed. So yeah, I mean, a lot of my energy has been focused on the more commercial stuff, but obviously I still do workshops, and that's where I do a lot of that more abstract stuff in terms of teaching and just shooting for myself, like while I'm there, to kind of show people how it is that I'm seeing a building in real time, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. Do you find at all, like you mentioned the abstract coming over into the commercial, do you find that the commercial work, or the commercial, when you have to put that hat or those lenses on, does, are you seeing that impact your abstract vision at all? I mean, I don't know if that would be the case, but.
I mean, probably. The thing is I think a lot of times the things that happen to you creatively, or the evolution of the way that you see, is so often subconscious. Like, you don't
Mm-hmm.
notice how different things that you encounter or influence or do impact how it is that you're making an image. Whether that is shooting commercially more often now than I used to, or the kind of things like seeing movies, or going to an art exhibit, or a particular book you read. All of these things, I think, creep into kind of the way that you interpret your environment and the world around you, and it comes into the way that you shoot and you make an image. I just think, unless you take the time to like really analyze your work, like over a period of time,
Mm-hmm.
and look at the evolution, I think it can be really difficult to see specifically how those things happen. But I have no
Mm-hmm.
doubt that they do.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
think it's you have to like make the effort to make those connections, and I think that just comes with sitting with it with time, and letting you know time pass and paying attention. And
Yeah.
sometimes I think you just get too busy to try to make those connections, which I
Mm-hmm.
think there is something to be said for creative people to have like a decent amount of downtime, or time to explore other mediums, or things that allow you to kind of just take a break from your usual way of seeing, and, you know, give you the space, I think, to make those connections.
Yeah. One of the things that I love about your newsletter also recommend that everyone subscribe to, because you pull in inspiration from different sources, and you'll sometimes share a CD that you're listening to, or or an artist that you're listening to, or a book that you're reading, or a video that you've watched. Where do you feel like you find inspiration that is most moves you the most, I guess?
I would say for me, probably other artwork. Like I love going to museums. Like art museums are probably one of my favorite things to do. Any new city I go to, I'm going to the art museums. Like the Art Institute of Chicago, I can't tell you, I've been there so many times, and I've seen
Yeah.
certain pieces of work countless times. Exploring the contemporary, the modern wing of that museum, I prefer that type of artwork. I do like the Impressionism. There are other things like the Renaissance period and things like that that I don't particularly get into. Artifacts don't do a lot for me. I'm not a big fan of like natural history museums. So, I don't know. I do think other types of art forms like painters or sculptors, things like that, I think are maybe most inspiring for me. Of course, I look at the photography and stuff, and I think that I've studied a lot of photographers over the years, but there's something about painters, I think, especially, that really grabs my attention. And maybe they're the area that has influenced my work, or the way that I interpret things artistically, a little bit more than other mediums, like film or books or music. No doubt all of that plays a role somehow. Haven't made those connections as well as I have in other places.
Well, painting, there's when you're doing abstract, especially architecture, it's fixed. Like you're dealing with a fixed object, whereas painters have the freedom of the imagination. And it seems to me that like experiencing that freedom of the imagination would translate into perhaps loosening the way that we see something that's fixed.
Yeah, I think that's why I'm drawn to abstraction, because of that. It's a way to interpret a scene or something that is fixed and something that is obvious in our environment in a different and new way. It leaves room for interpretation. Like my interpretation might be different than yours or anybody else's, just because of all of the experiences each of us has had that influences how you see something or what you notice in something. That can be said for even a photograph of something that is an obvious thing, like a person or a building or a street scene or whatever, but your interpretation might be different than mine. I don't know what it is about abstraction. I just think it's even looser and freer, even more open to different interpretations. And I find that fun and interesting. I think that has evolved over time. I don't think I used to be like that. I used to have a hard time understanding Picasso or even liking his work, but I like it now. So you grow when you change, and what you appreciate changes as you, I think, study art in different art forms, or, practice any artistic or creative thing yourself. There's the constant growing and changing, and there should be for everybody. In every realm of your life.
In every realm. Yeah. I often think of something I heard an author say. He said, if I'm still talking about this book I wrote 5 years from now, something is wrong. And I think of that, if I'm still photographing the same things or the same way as I was 5 years ago, something is not working.
Oh my God, I so get that. And I especially get that when I think about projects that I've done or series that I've done. It's been a long time since I've come up with something new, and I'm bored of the things that I've done. Like my urban quilt series, look, it's fine, but at this point I'm kind of over it. But I still make those images. Like they're easy for me to see, and I still like them, but in all honesty, I'm kind of bored with it. But I'm at the same time stuck. I think because I've been putting so much more energy into the commercial stuff, I've had a harder time finding that more artistic project that I want to work on. Or I've had a hard time making those connections between the work that I'm making and how those things kind of come together, or a way that I can put that into a series. I don't know. I guess I used to think that like series were super important, and in a lot of ways they are, depending on
Mm-hmm.
what world you want to be a part of, the galleries and all
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of things. But sometimes I think it's okay to just make the work and make what
Yeah.
you like, and eventually something will reveal itself if you slow down and I think make that time to kind of, make sense of how these things fit together.
Yeah. Well, a theme of what we've been talking about here is connections
Yeah.
between and having a perspective on our work. And I remember a webinar I attended of yours a year or two ago that was about photo projects or series. And it was really wonderful to hear this perspective of, yes, there are series that you go out and you're very intentional. Like you have this idea like Urban Quilt. And I don't know which came first, the image or the idea
The
or the
image. I
vision,
almost
the
never
image.
have an idea
Idea
first.
first.
Yeah.
Well, you
Like
talked about like having
never.
that idea first and then going out and looking for things
Yeah.
that fit that. And then you talked about the more intuitive one. I can't remember what label you put to that kind of series, but that it's more reflective and that you are noticing a theme over a longer period of time in a body of work that was probably subconscious. And
Mm-hmm.
then you can pull those threads together.
Yeah, that's usually how I work. I do think that photographers are one or the other, or tend to
Mm-hmm.
be one or the other. I know people that have a gazillion photo project ideas. They just need to go out and do them, like execute. I don't work that way. I've had one project like that ever, and everything else has, I guess, maybe been a hybrid where there's been images like 2 to 3 to 5, and then suddenly I'm like, oh, that's a thing I keep doing. What is that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is that about? And then it becomes intentional, and I then go make images for this idea that I have. But the idea came just from making things randomly, not
Yeah.
because I had some idea to begin with, because I rarely do. My brain just doesn't work that way. And some
Yeah.
people, that is how they're creative. That is not how I'm creative. Mine just is random. I feel like.
Well, and intuitive, like you said, like paying
Yeah.
attention to what draws your eye and what kind of gives you a spark to say, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a matter of doing the things that you get excited about. And when you start
Mm-hmm.
getting bored with it, it's
Yeah.
time to kind of mix things up however you can, find influences
Mm-hmm.
elsewhere, take a different lens, shoot something different,
Mm-hmm.
different subject matter, try a different technique, anything that makes it fun and kind of makes you excited to go make those images. Yeah, that
Yeah.
can be hard when you do this as like a career versus a hobby because you just
Mm-hmm.
get sucked into like, how am I going to make money, or, all the business type stuff that you're dealing with. I think you have to keep loving that creative part of it, or the creating part of it. Otherwise, your work just gets stale, and you begin to
Yeah.
just like rinse and repeat, and that's not
Mm.
interesting for anybody. I don't think.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'd love to do a retrospective now and go back to your
Sure.
pivot pixels, those images that represent some sort of turning point for you. Okay, so as we look at this, can you tell us, tell us something about this picture and what makes it a pivot?
So this is the pavilion at Lincoln Park. I think I shot this in 2012. So as I
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, I've been shooting for 23 years. So at that point, I had been shooting for 11 years. And prior to that, kind of a mix of everything. I had spent about 5 years focusing on portrait work, which, mind you, not a thing I like.
Yeah,
It's just
that's
something
another
that
one
I
of those
fell
love or
into.
hate it.
Yeah, it's something I fell into because I had kids, and people saw the photos I posted of my kids on Facebook or wherever, and then started asking me to shoot those pictures. And then you start making money, and you're like, oh, someone's gonna pay me to make
Mm-hmm.
pictures. So you just get sucked into it. So anyway, this was one of those images when I decided to quit all that portrait stuff, and I had no idea what I wanted to do. Like, I was at the stage where I wanted photography to be something more. I didn't want it to just be a hobby. Like, I wanted it to
Mm-hmm.
be career like, I guess. And with that, I felt like I needed a specific genre or a style or a thing that was like a focus for myself, that this is where my energy was, and this is, like, I guess kind of what defined how I'm seeing things. And this was maybe the first image that I made where that clicked, where I was
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, this is like what I like something that's more
Mm-hmm.
detailed, on the verge of abstraction. And I found myself, when I made this image and like liking it and being excited about it, going back and looking at previous work and recognizing that when I would just go shoot randomly at any given place, despite what was around, whether there were opportunities for street photography or nature photography, I kept being drawn to like the built environment, things that were made by humans.
Mm-hmm.
And the images that I most liked were the more detailed, abstracted interpretations. So it was in that moment that I was like, okay, this is, I think, where I need to focus my energy. And this is where I need to, make a list of, like, I live in a great city. Chicago has
Yeah.
lots of really fantastic architecture. So I started making a list of like, these are all the buildings or structures or sculptures that I want to go shoot. And this is how I'm going to focus my attention on making images of these places. And it was still a hobby. I wasn't really making any money at this type of work at that time, but it gave me direction and purpose. And I am one of those types of people who needs that. If I just
Mm-hmm.
go out into a place and have no direction, I feel overwhelmed, and everything I make is quite honestly garbage. Even today, I still give myself like little assignments. Like, either I'm just going to shoot this one particular building, or hey, if I'm going to wander the loop, I'm only going to look for reflections today. And not that I won't shoot something if it catches my eye, but the thing that I'm conscious of and the thing that I'm looking for or seeking out is that little assignment I'm giving myself. And when I do that, I tend to make better images because I'm seeing things that I would not see if that wasn't the thing that I was paying attention to. So this was, it was just this. Once I started making these images, I completely changed my website. Like, I got rid of all the landscape stuff, all the people stuff. It became very focused, and there was a style that was starting to emerge and be defined. And when that happened, that's when I started getting people reaching out to me to license images and want the images for things. So but it took me 11 years to figure that
Yeah.
out. Like, it wasn't a quick process for me. Obviously, when I first started shooting, I didn't go to school for photography. So when I first started shooting, it was just a hobby. There wasn't like some pressure or need to make money at it. I think that's how a lot of people start with photography. It is
Mm-hmm.
a hobby. Some people want to push it further into a career. Some people want to keep it a hobby. Neither is right or wrong. It's just, you have to kind of find your way. And this was one of those moments that helped
Yeah.
me figure that out.
Yeah, I can see why. It's such a beautiful image, and having seen that pavilion, I can appreciate even more the care that even went into this image. It's beautiful. Let's look at this one. So we've already referred to the urban quilt, and I think that this is one from that
Yeah.
series, right? So yeah,
So,
tell us about this.
yeah, the reason this, I think, is like one of those more pivotal moments for me, it's probably the first series. It's maybe the second series I ever had or tried to
Mm-hmm.
work on, but it's the first one that I think maybe had a bit more of a deeper meaning or a connection or purpose or interest for me. It got published a lot, exhibited a
Mm-hmm.
lot. It was one of those that seemed to connect with a lot of people. But it's interesting in the way that this even became a series. This is probably the third or fourth image I made that felt like this. So
Mm-hmm.
what I mean is this like stacking up of the different architecture, the colors, the textures. There's not necessarily the context of the environment around it, like the greater city scene. There's no sky, there's no people. It is literally just about the different eras and
Mm-hmm.
styles of architecture, and in a way to create a single frame in which all these different things can come together and feel like they make sense. And I remember posting this image on Facebook, because this is pretty old. I forget what year, 2012 to 14, somewhere in there. And someone made a comment. They're like, oh, it kind of looks like a quilt. I'm like, oh,
Mm.
you're right. It
Perfect.
does. That did not occur to me. And then it's weird that just that phrase made me start
Mm-hmm.
thinking about the image differently, and then go back and look at the other images that I made that had a similar feeling to them
Mm-hmm.
and reanalyze them. And when I did that, I was like, what are the common threads? Like, why do I keep making images that have this feeling? Other shots that I had made weren't square. They were different
Mm-hmm.
shapes. They were either sometimes panos, sometimes just a 2:3 crop ratio. I felt like, okay, this is something that could be a series. This is something that could make sense to kind of seek out these things in Chicago. And I've done this in other cities as well. And
Yeah.
the square crop ratio was intentional. It's, you heard me talk about series before. There are things that make series work better than others, that make them
Mm-hmm.
feel more cohesive, whether it's the same crop ratio, everything's in color, everything's black and white, they have a similar mood, they're all shot same weather conditions. There's lots of things, like that's a whole different topic, but there was the intent once I made this connection because of this person's comment that
Yeah.
this is a way to kind of move forward with this idea, this crop ratio, this way of kind of framing the images and looking for these patterns within the urban environment. So
Yeah.
it was just one of those moments where it's probably my most successful series in terms of finding a meaning and a way to make it cohesive.
One of the lessons I take away from what you just shared is also like it's vulnerable to put our work out there, right? Especially when it's something that's new to us or we're not sure, like it's not one of these epic shots of whatever. And part of the value of putting it out there and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable is that we sometimes get that kind of we get a reflection and we start some sort of feedback loop. And if you hadn't put it out there, would the quilt comment have ever come along and then
Right.
spurred this whole thing? So it feels like
Yeah,
there's a lesson there.
yeah, I think it's allowing yourself to be vulnerable and open to judgment, and good or bad. Like, look, not everything
Mm-hmm.
resonates with people. I've had things
Mm-hmm.
that nobody likes, and that's fine, and there are, yeah, there's just different. I don't know that I ever would have made that connection, or maybe it would have taken many more years for me to
Mm-hmm.
click with that or kind of pursue that. I've had other moments like that. There was a book I read and made an image and it got submitted. They needed a title, and the struggle with the title led down this weird path to like creating a whole other series. I do think it's like opening yourself up to maybe other people's opinions and judgments and just experiences in general that allows you to connect weird things in, lots of different things in maybe unusual ways. Maybe not
Yeah.
weird, unusual.
Different, unusual. Yeah.
Yeah.
Unexpected.
Whatever word you want to use.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I love this series and for all the reasons that you named, especially it's about juxtaposition to me.
Yeah.
Whether it's
It's
color, old, new.
Exactly. Old, new, colors, textures.
Mm-hmm.
It's I like this idea. I've always loved that the juxtaposition of old and new and finding ways to combine that, whether that's in photographs or in design. I think it's interesting to take two things that feel like opposing elements and make them work together. And that's part of what the attempt is with these images.
Yeah, it's lovely. Yeah, you've walked that tightrope very well with this particular series. So let's take a look at the third one. Another beautiful structure.
So this is more on the commercial end of things. This is not something that I would probably put on my website, like the abstract website. This was originally shot. I was commissioned by Chicago Magazine to make some images of the St. Regis in Chicago for a feature they were doing. Not something I do super often, but yay, it was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And this was one of the images. So this was why this is, I guess, important to me, this image in particular, is because it's somewhere between that abstract idea and a commercial idea. And it's a way to kind of bring my more detailed way of seeing into the commercial stuff that I do. And I like these types of images that don't necessarily show the entire thing or the building within its environment completely, but it is still showing an important piece or element of the design, and finding a way to do that so that architects and designers and developers think that that has value, I guess, is something that I'm trying to do better and get better at. And
Mm-hmm.
because the abstract stuff doesn't have value to them. Like it might be pretty and they might like it, but it doesn't have value to them in terms of marketing what they do. So I'm trying to find a way to kind of take that thing that drew me to architecture photography to begin with and bridge it with this like commercial part of what I do. So this was
Yeah.
one of those moments where I think I was, I don't know, more successful, or it was an eye opener for me. And like, okay, this is maybe one approach or a way to start thinking about doing that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Because it really emphasizes the curves. That's what I love about this. And I keep looking at
Yeah.
the right side of the image and
Mm-hmm.
like the curve and the negative space.
Yeah.
And yeah, it does bridge that abstract and literal, so well. And I can
Yeah.
see why that would be whew, um, a turning point. Yeah, awesome. And we should say, and I credit you for helping me to pay attention to these sorts of things, like who's the architect, what's the use of the structure, some of what's the context in that first image of the pavilion and this one are both Studio Gang.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which
Um,
is, I mean, I adore Studio Gang's work. And the funny thing is, of the St. Regis, like actually, there are no curves in that building.
oh, really?
There's
It
the
looks so
illusion.
curvy.
It absolutely does, but it gives the illusion of curves because of the way that the panels of glass are stepped back or forward and in or
Mm-hmm.
out are longer or shorter. And the way they reflect on each other, it gives this illusion of curves when they're not actually curves,
That's
which is,
awesome.
I think, fascinating. Yeah, her work is, I really, really adore her work. Yeah, there's such an organic feel to a lot of
Mm-hmm.
what she does. And it's just, I think it's very thoughtful in terms of how she designs in relation to the environment that the building is going or structure is going
Yeah.
to live in. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I like many, many other architects, but particularly drawn to a lot of what she does,
Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
because sometimes it's more sculptural. And when you're shooting something detailed or abstract, when a building is more sculptural or has a curviness to it, there's a greater opportunity to create abstract or line up different elements of the building in ways that are less obvious. Like when you just have
Mm-hmm.
a rectangular building, it's really hard
Yeah.
to abstract it. You can create a couple details of it that might be interesting, but you're not getting these like different overlaps and alignments of things to kind of reinterpret what you're seeing, I guess.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. You have to do a lot of heavy lifting when it's when it's the more traditional or boxy kind of
yeah,
structure.
yeah, different approach.
Yeah. And we should say, like, if whoever's watching, if you live in Chicago or make it to Chicago, right around the corner from the St. Regis is Aqua Tower, which is that's also Studio Gang, right? That's
Yes.
also
Mm-hmm.
Ginny Gang. And that has all those curves and lines and just a million
That you see
possibilities.
best when you're right underneath it.
Yeah, it's
You
so
don't
cool.
notice it so much when you're from a distance, but when you get right underneath it and look up,
Hmm.
it's very sculptural, very curvy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super awesome. So you live in this really inspiring city. You have all this wonderful architecture, and before you said something about sometimes we can get bored, and
It happens.
it happens. And so what do you do to move through those moments? Like you named a few things that were options, but what do you find is your go to get yourself unstuck?
I really do think taking a break is maybe
Mm,
one of the better things you can do. Maybe it's cliche, but I do think like just going for a walk, like, or working out, like something that clears your head, that gets you out of that space where you're thinking about it too much. It gives you
yeah.
something else to think about or pay attention to. So I don't know, that's one way, but it is also, I do, for me, I think kind of paying attention to or consuming other creative things that aren't necessarily me photographing. So, going to museums, or art exhibits, concerts, live music, movies, paying attention to how something is filmed, looking for the still image within a movie, or the way light is interacting, or how the director, or the director of photography is using space and light and things within movies. That's another way to do it. Sometimes reading something that like is an escape, like a novel, not so much something educational, but something that is more escapist, something that just gets you out of your head. I'm an overthinker, so I'm in my head way too much. So the things that I can do to like get out of that, like, I think in experiencing different things, I think that like allows you to make those connections within your own work. Like, why is this happening here? And why do I keep doing that? And why? Like, it's all the whys.
Just why?
Yes. I also have a science background, so like the curiosity and the whys of things like drive me. So I think it's, knowing how you work and the things that kind of help you. Again, I keep coming back to connections. I think it is all about making those connections from the outside world to like the things that you yourself are creating, and what like lights you up, what fires you up, what makes you want to create. And I think if you just keep doing it, it is a matter of, and sometimes it is a matter of just like go out and shoot. Like, don't get out of practice, because I noticed when like during COVID, I didn't shoot a lot. I think kind of burnt out, and I just like didn't want to make any images. So like for months I didn't do anything. And then you pick up a camera for the first time and it feels hard. Like seeing is a muscle. It is something you have to do regularly to be good at it. So when you have long lapses in shooting, I think you get rusty, and I think it gets a little hard. So it's like, take those breaks, but kind of sometimes you just have to push yourself to go make an image of anything. Like, even if it sucks, even if you don't like it, it allows you to kind of just get back into the practice of it.
And the fun of it.
Like remembering why you like it.
Exactly. And one of the things that's been very liberating for me is releasing this pressure or this expectation that every time I go out with a camera in my hand, I'm going to come back with something that I love. And so I really appreciate you saying, like, the pictures could be really crummy, but that's not the point. The point is just that you're out, you're seeing, you're doing it, you're exercising that muscle. Yeah.
And I think it's something that, I need the reminder as much as anybody. Like, I get stuck, like I said, I'm stuck with, I can't think of a project or some new way to shoot or something that's like exciting me. And it's been a while, and I'm like having a really hard time finding that thing or that way in which I want to shoot something that, I'm super fired up over. And so I'm stuck. Like anybody gets stuck. So sometimes I think for me lately is more just like pushing myself to go out and actually make some images that aren't tied to me teaching a workshop or someone paying me for a photo shoot. That it's just me doing it because I want to do it and for no other reason.
Yeah.
I do think, as much as, of course, I want people to sign up for workshops, for me, I think my best work is made when I'm alone and get lost a little bit in the process. And I'm not paying attention to everything around me or the people around me. I think that's when I'm most creative, is when I'm alone. And I mean, look, I like shooting with other people. Like, it's fun. You get different things out of it.
Yes. I found that what I appreciate about the shooting with other people, and usually it's within the context of a workshop or some sort of photo walk or some experience, is that there's an immersion element. Like, I remember after I came back from your Chicago workshop, like, I could not look around without seeing photographically. And so that immersion of that's all I was doing was really helpful. And like you, I really prefer to be by myself if I'm really going to be taking photos, because that's a different kind of immersion. And
Yeah.
there's not the, oh, what are they looking at, or what do they see, or what if I'm missing something? There's all sorts of
Yeah.
little monkey mind that can come up.
100%. Yeah. 100%.
Oh,
Yeah.
so what do you feel like has been the biggest surprise that you've experienced over the past, 2+ decades of doing this? What's been most surprising to you?
There's been so many surprises. I mean, I never in a million years thought I would make a living doing this. I never thought I would teach ever. Like, I am, despite what people say to me now, a relatively shy person and
Mm.
very introverted. So, so Chris with Out of Chicago, when he's the first person I taught for, and when so I taught at his first workshop, and when he first asked me to do it, I was like, absolutely not. Under no circumstances am I teaching for you or ever. And he just kept bugging me and kept pushing me. And I'm like, oh my God, fine. I've never been so nervous in my probably entire life. Like that first time I ever taught at a conference. It's just never something I ever thought I would be doing. I'm really glad and grateful to him for pushing me and, to do that. It was great. It was terrifying.
Yeah.
I don't get as nervous about it anymore. If I'm doing a new presentation, like something I haven't talked about a bunch of times, or a topic that feels more vulnerable, then I get nervous about it. But when I'm talking more about the compositional stuff or just showing photos and talking about them, that is fine. But when it, gets into you're feeling a little more exposed, then I just, or I'm showing the evolution. So all the crummy crap I made 20 years ago and the evolution of like how you get to where you get, like that is like, ew, I don't know that anybody needs to see that. But there is some benefit to seeing how people grow and evolve and change and find their way. But it doesn't feel, you just feel, I remember when I did a talk for Chris at one of the things and did talk about that. And I remember like the first few slides, they're like not the great images. They're the things that were at the beginning that helped me figure out where I was going. And, you can just see people like, why is she talking to us? These are terrible
How did
photos.
she get up there?
Yeah. And then it's like, okay, I will redeem myself. I promise. I don't know. I mean, there's been a million surprises. Like I've had jobs in places in the world that I never, ever thought. Like, I'm like, what? How did that happen to me? I was sent to Paris for 2 weeks to shoot for a hotel brand to create artwork for their hotel. That was probably one of the most amazing jobs I've ever had. But
that sounds like a dream.
Last year I got to go to Alaska for a commercial shoot. Did I ever think that was going to happen in my life? No, I did not. There's a lot of those moments that, super surprising and never ever expected, but very grateful for, excited about,
cool
to get paid to make images, like whether they're the like artsy creative things or the commercial things is fantastic.
And you've worked hard to be able to do it.
I mean, I'm not saying I haven't put in an insane amount of work, but it's just not something I ever really thought was going to happen. It's not what I envisioned for myself 25 years ago. Very glad that this is what has happened.
Well, and that's a testament to like being open to what possibilities there are. At some point along the way, you said yes to something that you didn't expect to, or that, well, like the teaching, that was a leap of faith to say, okay.
I can't tell you how many times I've said yes to things that scare the shit out of me. And I'm like, okay, I don't really know how I'm going to pull this off, but we'll figure it out.
Exactly.
And I
you
think
figure it out.
That is kind of how you have to be to maybe be successful in a creative endeavor, is you just have to say yes to a lot of things that might scare the crap out of you.
And that you don't know what's going to happen, and you have to trust you're going to be okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, where do you feel like I'm touching on this with some folks about AI, because that's been quite quite a
Topic.
lot of chatter, hot topic. And I don't know if this would be part of your response, but I'm curious about where you think photography is going. You've been in this now for, a few decades, so you've seen some trends. And if you had a crystal ball, what do you think we're headed towards?
I know a lot of people get afraid of AI and it's going to replace like this career or that. And yeah, to an extent, but I mean, didn't computers replace a lot of careers?
Lots
There's
of
just,
things did. Yeah.
you gotta grow and you have to change. And I think being afraid of it is a mistake. I think you have to figure out how to use it to your advantage or adapt to it.
Mhm.
Personally, I think an image made solely with AI is not photography. I just
Mhm.
think it's a different art form and we need to just look at it as something different entirely. And I think look, I've used AI like in Photoshop to mainly to remove things, sometimes to
Mhm.
change the sky. Like, you know, I have used it. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think you have to figure out where the line is for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't foresee myself making images that are, I'm giving AI a prompt and it's generating something that is completely not mine. I think it's, yeah, I don't know. I honestly, I don't think a lot about it. I'm not too concerned about it. I think it's interesting. I think some of the images that I've seen people make, and I don't know what degree of AI they are, if they're entirely AI or not, are
Mhm.
pretty cool. I just think it's a different way to create art. Um,
Yeah.
and if that's what you're into, why not? Probably not going to be the way that I do it. I still enjoy the act of going out with a camera and seeing something in the world and making an image. I don't love the act of sitting on my computer and
Mhm.
editing or creating things from nowhere. But there are people that is what fires them up. Then
Yeah.
by all means do that. That is not where I get the joy out of photography. For me, it is
Mhm.
being out in the world and experiencing the world like through the camera.
Well, I appreciate that framing of it is a different art form, and so it's not about replacing, perhaps, but it's learn how to leverage it. I guess it's kind of what I'm taking away from what you're sharing.
Yeah. I just think you have to grow and evolve. It's no different than when photography first appeared and it changed the way people painted. To me,
Right.
it's you grow, you change, you evolve. That's
Yeah.
if you want to survive, that's what you have to
Yeah.
do. Um,
Survival of the adaptable.
yeah,
Yeah.
use it to your advantage. It has advantages. Use it.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I really admire about you and that I've learned from you that I'd like to maybe close out our conversation with is around challenging ourselves to see differently. How, what are some ways that we can challenge ourselves to see our world differently when it comes to our artistic expression?
I think there's a couple of ways that you can do that from a practical, stance. Like when you're out shooting, I really am a firm believer that the more limitations you have, the more creative you
Mm-hmm.
are forced to be. So I still do this all the time, like set up limitations on myself, whether it's I will only shoot with one lens or I will only shoot with one concept in mind, whether that's, like I said before, I'm only going to look for reflections today or I'm only going to shoot things symmetrically. Like
Mm-hmm.
these are pretty simple, basic like limitations, but it forces you to find ways to see what is around you within those constraints. And the more constrained you are, like when I've been to a location a million times, so say the Lincoln Park Pavilion, for example,
Mm-hmm.
I will give myself this assignment. Like, I am only going to shoot this, let's say today, with my wide angle lens because I never use this lens. It is the hardest lens for me to see with because if you're shooting details and abstracts, having more in the scene does not help you. So,
Right.
if I want to challenge myself, I'll give myself this assignment. Okay, you're only shooting with that wide angle lens today, Ange, and you're only looking for symmetrical shots. This is all you're allowed to shoot. This obviously works best in a location or a place that you can go back to a bunch of times. You maybe don't want to do this if you're traveling to a city you're never going to go back to, because you want more opportunity, more options. But if you're stuck in a rut and you're like, I see nothing when I go out, I come back with nothing but crap every time I go out, I think give yourself as many limitations as possible. Pick one location, pick one lens, pick one idea, and that is how you shoot. Obviously I think in architecture, because that's mostly what I shoot, this can be applied to anything that you're photographing. I really do think, creativity is born out of limitation. So whatever you can do to yourself to kind of create that, do that. On the other side of that, like, go photograph the same thing over and over and over and over again. It is its own kind of limitation because it gets harder and harder to find something new every time you go back. But it forces you to look harder and to see more purposefully and kind of seek out those less obvious interpretations of whatever it is you're photographing.
Yeah.
I mean, those are things that have always helped me. And it's not easy. Sometimes I will do that and I will come home with, I'm like, I literally see nothing. I can't find something. Yeah. And sometimes that's just like your mood, you're crabby, like whatever, and sometimes you're more open. So that also influences things. So,
yeah. Well, you're reminding us that, like, creativity is a muscle that we need to keep flexing and building and practicing. And I draw kind of a parallel to my musician training, where we had to practice scales. We had to practice arpeggios. You had to do etudes, all these exercises that prepared you so that when it was time to play Mozart or Beethoven or whatever, you had those not just muscle memory of different things, but you built that muscle so that came easier. And I remember when I realized that with photography, like, oh, there's an equivalent of doing scales in photography, like you just described, 2 exercises that I think are like that.
And then you're able to put it all together without thinking. It's when I teach about composition and I go over, things like symmetry and leading lines and rule of thirds and framing and whatever, none of these concepts are difficult. It is a matter of getting good at each of them individually, so that when you go shoot something, you don't even, like, I don't even think about these things. It's just, it is completely intuitive. You're just like, that looks good because it looks good. Like, it looks good because of all the things I've trained myself to do compositionally, but I am no longer thinking about it. It's just like the technical. When you first learn, you're like, oh my God, how does aperture and shutter speed and ISO and focal length all work together? Like, it's a lot. It feels overwhelming when you're new to it and you have to think about, like, oh, I'm shooting at 300 millimeters at f11, at whatever ISO. And then I'm shooting at 24 millimeters at f11. How does that look different? You know what I mean? It's like when you're first learning the technical, you do these stupid exercises so that you can understand how depth of field works, so that you can understand how focal length affects depth of field and all of these things. And eventually you no longer think about that. It is like, doesn't even cross your mind. You just know what's going to happen, or you understand if you shoot with this lens versus that lens, like, these things will be in focus, or, whatever. It's the same for composition. And all of those things are needed to create something. Like you said, it's the music. You practice each one individually so that you can put the whole thing together without effort, with ease. So photography is the same way. All creative acts require a ton of work. It is not, it doesn't just like flow out of you.
Right.
It makes you like important. That, because you do sometimes have those moments where it is like an epiphany, where you're like, oh my God, like, that just came to me. Well, it didn't really just come to you. It came through years of practice and training your mind to see things a certain way, or connect things a certain way. So
coming back to connect.
Yeah. But it is what it is. It's It sounds boring to go out and only focus on this one thing, but I promise you will come back with better images. I do every single time when I limit myself.
Yeah. Absolutely. And to remember, you don't have to go to epic locations to do this. You don't have
Oh
to
my God,
spend a lot of
no.
money. You can just step outside your door,
Yeah.
and challenge
Because it's
yourself that way.
practice. It's like then when
Hmm.
you get in front of the epic location, you just know what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to be learning at that
Yeah.
moment, especially if
Yeah.
you've paid a lot of money to be there
Yeah.
and taken a lot of
Exactly.
time. So,
Yeah, for
well,
sure.
so we've alluded to your newsletter and your workshops. Can you tell us like how we can find out more and engage with you? Where would you find you?
Um, yeah, I mean, Instagram is probably where I am most often in terms of social media. So I have three accounts on Instagram.
I saw that.
So
I
pick
know.
which one you like. One is more the abstract stuff, one is like all the teaching workshop type stuff, and then one is the commercial. So it really just depends like what interests you. Or go to all three. Um,
Yeah.
and then other than that, in terms of like my website, which is structured the same way, it is the abstract
Hmm.
stuff, the workshops, and the commercials. So it just depends what you're interested in. And like the newsletters or the emails that I send out are different for
Hmm.
each of
Hmm.
those groups. So, you were talking about the inspiration newsletter, which is probably one of my favorite things that I do every month, like just sharing stuff from, things to watch or listen to or attend or whatever. That's on the workshop page if that is something you're interested in. People, I get a fair amount of emails in response to that people seem to like it. It is not about me at
Yeah.
all. It's about all other creative people. It is not an ego thing. it
Well,
is about
it
just
might not
creativity
be,
in general.
but it's a reflection of you and who you are as an artist and your
I
own
suppose.
philosophy. So I think it is about you a little bit. Or
A
it
little bit.
shows
I mean, I guess the
in the
point is I'm
best
not
way,
promoting
in the
my
best way
stuff.
possible. I
Well,
know, but
thank you.
you see it and you get a sense of who you are and how you operate and your philosophy. And I think that that's really, it's a show, don't tell in
I
terms
guess.
of
Yeah.
how we experience you. So, well, thanks so much, Angie. It was a lot of fun chatting with you and I hope we get to do
Yeah.
it again.
Yeah.
And,
Good to see you as
yeah,
always.
good to see you. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Let us know in the comments what was most useful or meaningful to you, and be sure to subscribe so that you're notified of future episodes. This channel is made possible in part by nature photography classes and their Inspired Creator Grant. You can learn more or submit your own application at naturephotographyclasses.com/inspiredcreator. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.